to another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you as always. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the middle of the week. Hopefully yours is going well so far. And if not, hopefully today is the beginning of an uphill climb. Hopefully things are getting better for you wherever you may be at this moment in time. Glad to be with you as always. Got a lot of good things in store on the show today, courtesy of our friend Wright, who makes yet another appearance here on In Touch with Indiana Sports. I'm glad to have him on as always. And he's quickly become one of my favorite guests to have on the show just because he really is. It's so different compared to some of the conversations that I feel like I have. I feel like I could ask Ant almost anything related to not only Indiana basketball, but just college basketball in general. And he's not afraid to just veer off into directions that maybe he wasn't expecting me to take him initially. So that's become one of my favorite interviews whenever I get the pleasure of having him on. And I appreciate that as always. We'll get to that here in just a moment. But before we dive into that, just kind of want to share my thoughts on where Indiana currently stands right now after, of course, unfortunately falling last night to Oregon on the road. In what was, another kind of heartbreaker. Indiana has a late lead with about, a minute and a half to go. And then Jackson Shellstad of Oregon hits a three-pointer. And I don't believe Oregon had hit a three at all in the second half, if I'm not mistaken. And they hit what ended up being the dagger. I don't think Indiana scored after that. And it just seemed to take the wind out of the sails, unfortunately, for the Hoosiers. And, the loss doesn't mean that, all hope is gone for the Hoosiers to get into the NCAA tournament. It obviously would have helped them out quite a bit to get that win. There would have been a lot less pressure going into this Ohio State game, when you look ahead to Saturday. But one thing that we've been really consistently saying over the last couple of episodes of the show is that if Indiana can split their final two games, you'll be feeling pretty good about where they stand when it comes to whether or not they'll have a spot in March Madness this year. And of course, that being the goal for this current goal for this team. And, anything that comes on top of that is really everything that happens at this point is just extra because, as we've said many times before, now that the Mike Woodson era is officially coming to an end, the rest of the season just feels like a bonus. And to those who are still, on this roster, who have, especially guys like Trey Galloway and Anthony Leal, the guys who have put in the most time into their career, really their entire career, I should say, collegiate career at Indiana, it means something more to those guys to not only just make the NCAA tournament, because both Galloway and Leal, they've done that before, but they'd like to go out and be remembered for something more than just NCAA tournament appearances. Because let's be real, when's the last time Indiana has done something of note outside of making the tournament? Which really, if we're talking about the standard of Indiana basketball, making the tournament is the baseline. And so they haven't really done anything more than that since the 2016 run where they went to the Sweet 16 and won the Big Ten tournament, or Big Ten regular season title, I should say, with Yogi Ferrell. I mean, this is 9 years, right? So you get to 2026 with Indiana's head coach next season, whoever that may be, depending on what happens this year, of course, it will have been 10 years, an entire decade since Indiana had made the second weekend. Of course, that could still change depending on what happens this season. And then speaking of Yogi Ferrell, Trey Galloway surpasses Yogi Ferrell's appearance record, right? With his game last night against Oregon. And not only that, he was Indiana's leading scorer, 16 points, really put in a good showing on the road. And kudos to him for setting a record at Indiana, for most games played in an IU uniform. And I know that's only possible because of the COVID season. So either way, shout out to him. And I'm glad to have Trey Galloway have been a part of these last several Indiana teams. And really, he went from being somebody who was not necessarily an afterthought on the early seasons of his career, but he was somebody who was seen as, a very reliable bench player, I feel like, and would come in and he would do the right things, but you didn't really know exactly what his ultimate role was going to be. And I think, looking back on it now and looking back at his career, Trey Galloway is somebody who really throughout his entire tenure, if you will, with Indiana, he's been a utility guy, because even as his role has increased over the years, he's always kind of been the guy that, whether it be Archie Miller or Mike Woodson most recently, he's been the guy that has filled the void when something, needed to be fixed with this roster, especially when point guards have gone down or maybe guys aren't playing up to their potential and adjustments have been needed to be made. Galloway has always been that guy. So shout out to him and his lengthy and prosperous career with Indiana. He also, I can't remember if he set the assist record last year or if he tied it or came really close. I feel like that might have been in the Kansas game last season, if I'm not mistaken, but maybe I'm completely wrong on that. But nonetheless, big picture for Indiana. You got Ohio State coming up this Saturday, senior night, a second senior night, I should say, for both Anthony Leal and Trey Galloway, but there'll be some others who go through that ritual as well. But senior night against Ohio State. Ohio State needs this win just as much, if not more, than Indiana. So it'll be interesting to see that matchup play out, because really, this one of the biggest stories will be maybe the fact that this is a play-in game for the NCAA tournament for one or both of these teams. And I meant to mention this earlier, but we are going to look once again at Mike DeCourcy and Joe Lunardi's updated brackets. And of course, these do not factor in the most recent loss to Oregon, but this will be something that we can still reference and kind of predict how things would look after the loss to Oregon. So, and I think you'll be pleased with what they put out there. And maybe some of you have already taken a look at this as well, since these were released yesterday, but still worth visiting, I feel like, in discussing what Indiana might need to do in order to, again, once again, solidify their chances. So we all know, even though they will end the regular season against Ohio State this Saturday, they still have the Big Ten tournament in their home state, and not necessarily their home city, but just right down the road in Indianapolis. They'll play in Gainbridge Fieldhouse, and if Indiana has a tournament bid on the line, which is looking like, even if they do beat Ohio State, they'll be fighting for maybe an extra seed line or two if they can make a deep run in the Big Ten tournament. And man, wouldn't it be something to, and I don't mean to just, I know it might sound like I'm propping up Mike Woodson for a second, but if this team can get hot and just, do something that seems more than improbable, because we know the team has the ability, it just hasn't always come together. But imagine if this team were to do something crazy, like win a Big Ten tournament for the first time in the history of the program. Maybe it would be a great way to send off Mike Woodson and kind of it would give him something that no other Indiana head coach has, right? Because other coaches have their different marks. Tom Crean won 2 Big Ten championships. Archie Miller really doesn't have anything. Mike Davis got to a Final Four. Kelvin Sampson had some really good teams, but those didn't pan out, unfortunately, because of the things that he unfortunately was fired for. So, but either way, that could be Mike Woodson's claim to fame if he's able to pull off something like that. And again, me mentioning this is not me projecting that will happen. But I do think with the loose nature of the last couple of weeks of this Indiana basketball team, I think you can't really throw anything off the table. There are things that are more realistic than others. And there's one thing that we're going to get into a little bit on the other side towards the end of the show that I saw on social media the other day. And it really is kind of a ridiculous question, if we're being honest, but it's something that I want to pose to commenters. And maybe you want to clown me for even humoring the question at all. But we'll save that for later on in the show, because if I mention it now, you have no reason to continue listening, right? Maybe a little bit of a tease, right? Learning the art of the tease. I don't necessarily do a best job of that on this show sometimes, so I'll just leave you with that right now, and we'll get to it here later on. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and transition now and bring on Mr. Ant Wright of the Full Ride Network. And we have great discussion, not only on this current Indiana basketball team, we also discuss the head coaching prospects and get into a number of other things as well. So I'm looking forward to sharing that conversation with you right now. Joining us once again for the first time in a while, it is Mr. Ant Wright of the Full Ride Network. Welcome back to In Touch with Indiana Sports. Pleasure to have you as always.
Thanks for having me, man.
So let's go ahead and just get right into it. Indiana basketball, other than the fact that they just lost to Oregon last night, of course, it feels like ever since the weight had been lifted off, the pressure for Mike Woodson and whether or not he'd be around for the foreseeable future. We all know how that's going to work out, or how it has worked out, I should say. It feels like this Indiana team has been playing with new life. It feels like they're playing looser. It feels like all of the guys who know that this is their final season, the Trey Galloways, the Anthony Leals, those sorts of guys. It feels like it just feels like almost like a new season, and that they're playing to get into the NCAA tournament at this point. And I feel like a lot of people were not expecting that just 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, I'll say this. I don't agree to the how can I say this? I'm not trying to be disrespectful to you.
No, totally fine. Say whatever you want to say.
Like, I don't really agree with the notion that like guys are, they are like playing with a chip on their shoulder and doing all these things. I just feel that Woodson is no longer being held by the neck with obligations and the politics. Like he doesn't have to answer to anybody right now, and he doesn't have to do favors, right, to retain guys for the next year, because this is it, right? So
yeah,
what have you seen? You've seen a rotation, right? We haven't seen a consistent rotation all year long, right? You see certain guys not playing, and whether Indiana was doing well or bad, they're like, oh man, he hasn't played it in a game or two. We have to get him in here. You're just not seeing that. You're seeing 8-man rotation. Then Hatton is like the emergency break glass if you need it, right? For once, we're seeing an Indiana team that you know who's going to play, right? There's no, is Bryson Tucker going to get in? Is is he going to get the young guys? No, there's none of that. There's no more of that. It's, look, we're going to be here to win the game. And, they went with the one big lineup, right? You could see it last night, right? They went with the one big lineup, and this is where it's always been good having something in your back pocket if need be. And they had to go to the 2 big lineup for longer than they've done in recent times because of the defensive matchup. But when they made that change, they made the change with the guard play where they played 3 guards. They didn't play 2 bigs plus McKenzie. And I think that helped them stay in the game. They're up 1 with 90 seconds left, right? On the road at Oregon, this would have been a quad 1A win for them.
And probably would have solidified. I mean, maybe not 100% solidified, but it all would have all but solidified their NCAA tournament appearance.
I think it would have for sure. And, when they did that, and man, and then, Oregon called timeout, man, big shot by Trey, right? And you're looking and you're like, man, one stop. They come out with a defensive lineup, right? They come out and press, and they trap at half court, right? 10 seconds have now, come off the clock. Then they put in, and then they D up. In my opinion, was their best defensive possession until Shellstad hit that shot with 0 seconds left, right? So I just feel that there is you could look at this team and you could finally see an identity.
Yeah.
Right? Kenan Carlisle and Miles Rice, the way that they've bought in on the defensive end, is why they've been much better on that end, right? Anthony Leal for sure, Ballo, his activity for sure, but Miles and Kanan, the way that they've really said, you know what, offense is going to come, but my energy has to start out on defense, and that identity is just helping them and helping the team form that. And it is March; it's kind of late to find that. And the good teams find that in November, right? They find that in December. But no, that's the unfortunate thing that we just don't have the time to watch this team start from then. Now we can see what they could possibly do. But it's all good at this.
They got Ohio State this weekend to wrap up the regular season slate. Do you think that this is a play-in game for both teams, or you think that maybe both teams could still get in, or do you think that there's a lot at stake going into this matchup for one or the other?
Ohio State won a really big game last night against Nebraska, double overtime. They scored over 100 points, both teams. Insane game. That was a game that Ohio State needed. I think this game means a little bit more to Ohio State, honestly. But if you're Indiana, you wanted to split these last two games. You wanted to split Oregon and Ohio State at minimum, right? That's why this game was kind of big last night. I was like, hey, look, here's your opportunity, right? This isn't a situation where they're down by 12 or 13. Hey, let's get it back close so it doesn't look as bad. No, it was like, you guys can win this game, right? Make stops, have good possessions, and officiating is one thing with the physicality of the game and all that, but they put themselves in a position to win that game last night. But I don't think that this is of course you want to win every game, but this isn't a must win or you're out for Indiana. I think it is for Ohio State, because if Ohio State gets that 14th loss, then a 15th loss in the Big Ten tournament. I have not seen an at-large team make the tournament since 2019 with 15 losses. So
especially if you're comparing resumes, and not that they're all resumes are created equal, but when you're going up against Indiana, who's also on the bubble, and one of your marks is 2 losses to that team, that makes it easy to decide one over the other if you're not able to get a win against Indiana, of course. That's
true. And but I don't even see Indiana and Ohio State on the same plane, honestly, right now. The one thing that Indiana does, why they would want to win this game for sure, is that they don't have any quad 2, 3, or 4 losses, and winning this game would keep that unblemished. So it's always good to see, hey, look, I know we have 12 losses against quad 1, 4 wins, but we're taking care of business when we need to.
They're the king of quad 2, so to speak.
King of quad 2, Indiana Hoosiers.
Looking ahead to the Big Ten tournament, I don't know if this is 100% set in stone, but I do think Indiana at this point in time would face off with Oregon in their opening round matchup. Do you know if that's for sure the case? And if so,
if Ohio State wins, if Ohio State wins, Indiana will be the 10, I believe, 10 or 11. And then if Indiana wins, they're going to just face Oregon.
Okay, gotcha. So if they win, they'll face Oregon. Of course, you just played them. Do you like that being kind of back-to-back, especially the fact that you just lost to them?
Yeah, for sure, because you were on the road and you had that game. You were on the road, you had that game, and I think that Indiana had to adjust more to Oregon than Oregon had to adjust to Indiana. And I think that is going to play into Indiana's favor, because they kind of tweaked and tooled with what worked and what didn't work. Oregon kind of just did what they did. They made a couple of adjustments, but you could tell very simply what they were trying to do. They were trying to attack Luke Goody, right? And they were trying, and they put on TJ Bamba on Galloway late to interrupt him. Just a couple of adjustments there, a couple rotation adjustments, could fall into Indiana's favor, especially when you're playing, pretty much at home.
And then looking, of course, that being Indianapolis, a Gainbridge Fieldhouse. And then looking maybe a little further ahead, maybe too far ahead, some would say. But if Indiana were to get into the NCAA tournament, what do you kind of think this team's ceiling is postseason wise? Do you think they can make a second weekend run? Do you think, I think the talk at the beginning of the year was that this team should at least make the second weekend. And then if things really work out, maybe go further. Do you still think that to be the case if they find a way to get into March Madness?
This is a corny answer, but it's very cliche that I always use, but like, you don't really know until you see the bracket, and
yeah, that's true. No, that's 100% true.
There are just some teams that I think Indiana would match up better against, and I think there's some teams that they wouldn't match up very well against, right? If you're playing a team that has a 5 that can really stretch, that's a really tough assignment for guys like Ballo. But if you're playing more of a bruiser down low and you're playing guards who really don't really get theirs, I mean, you're looking at a much better situation there. But, getting to the second weekend and Final Four, we've seen over the last several years, I believe there's been, 2 play-ins that have made a Final Four?
11? NC State last year was one of the weirdest Final Four teams of all time just because they were going to fire Kevin Keats.
Yeah,
they were going to fire Kevin Keats had they not made that ACC tournament run to get in.
Yeah, it's crazy. So yeah, we've seen 3 11s make the Final Four in the last several years. Syracuse made it as an 11, UCLA made it in as an 11, and NC State 11, all Final Fours. So anyone in that top 11 can make it. Just need some luck. Right? You need some schedule luck, which happens all the time. Upsets happen literally all the time. So your region can go from looking like the hardest to the easiest in like 4 hours. Right? Right. In like 4 hours. So like you really don't know how things are going to play out. All you need to do is just take care of business of what and who's in front of you.
You know what else would be really weird too is if Indiana were to get in, if they end up getting matched up with a team that has a head coach that may be potentially flirting with the Indiana job, that could make for some really awkward matchups, I feel like.
I mean, yeah, kind of, sort of. I don't think it's more so awkward, but more so of like, I don't know, it's the NCAA tournament and like you're just worried about sending your seniors off with a good note and some more memories, and you want to just have one more practice with your guys, one more breakfast with your guys, one more walkthrough with your guys, because everything at that point is like everything is just so fragile, right? And that's when seniors are like, yo, I'll never have this again, ever. Like not even at the professional level, like you'll never have this type of camaraderie, you'll never have this type of fame, right? Like you're not going to be the big man on campus ever again. So it's like all those emotions kind of into one where you just want to do, one more time, right? One more meal, one more walkthrough. Every time you win, you get one more of each. So, that's pretty much the focus, not so much of, like, hey, where am I going to be at in a couple weeks? You know what I mean? Those are guys who get out in the first night, the first day.
I want to talk more about the coaching search now before we wrap things up. First of all, do you feel like the Indiana administration handled things well? And I know, a lot of things are done under the table, but when it came out that Mike Woodson was going to step down, seeing how things have turned out for this team in the aftermath, do you think it was a good decision, or do you think it could have been handled differently?
No, I think it was a good decision. I think it was good. I think it satisfied everyone. I think initially I had said that, hey, if he's stepping away, let one of the assistants take over and just, remove yourself completely. But, looking back on that now, looking at how much Woodson has done for Indiana, whether that's a player or like as an alum, the dude loves the school. And for him to kind of go out on his own accord is a big thank you. And at the end of the day, if this team does what it needs to do in this next week or two, that's 3 tournaments in 4 years.
Yeah.
And the one down year was 19 wins. I'm not saying that that's up to Indiana standards, but like my alma mater, like Michigan, they won 8 games last year. It could be way worse. It could be way worse. Trust me. So, you gotta kind of just take a step back and understand that, like, no, like your program's not in the dumpster fire. Your program is still alive. People are still paying attention. The media is still paying attention. People want Indiana to do well, and they want them to do well just to knock them down, right? It's like that's that's kind of what it is. And Indiana is still in a good spot. I know alum, like, they've seen national championships and they've seen what Indiana could be at the peak. I get that, but modern era, you got to kind of take a step back and understand how much talent there is now, and the game is just way, way different. And the thing is, you have to get someone in that program who understands that and who's going to leverage that Indiana brand to, push it back close to those heights for sure.
So if you're Indiana, who are you kind of looking at the closest, and who is somebody that you would be willing to take a risk on that maybe is not your third, fourth, or even fifth choice? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot there, so I apologize.
No. Because look, you have to find someone who wins, right? You got to find someone who wins. Like, I wouldn't mind, because, like, you have the popular picks like McCollum and like Otzelberger and all those, but like if you were to go like outside the box, which is kind of, they wouldn't do this, but like Chris Collins, like imagine him at Indiana. Just imagine
that
him.
Would make a lot of people mad too, I think.
I mean, be mad as being a top 10 program in the country year in and year out.
Yeah.
You see what he's doing with Martinelli and a redshirt freshman who didn't play at all this year. And then,
fun fact, he's the only coach Mike Woodson hasn't beaten at least once. Not that Mike Woodson's the standard of coaching, but he's the only one that he couldn't beat.
Listen, like, Chris Collins is ridiculous. They would never do that. I don't think Chris would do that either. But when you're talking about like a good coach, like that dude could coach his ass off. Indiana fans won't like this either, but you give Ben Johnson from Minnesota some resources, that dude will be disgusting somewhere. Absolutely disgusting. He'll never get that opportunity because of Minnesota. And basically, like, man, I've talked to former Minnesota players. They themselves have said Minnesota basketball is like a high mid-major in the highest mid-major conference. So like that's kind of how it feels, and that's kind of how it is. And like it's so hard. It's so hard to get over the hump there. But those are two coaches that I think are really, really good. But like Mark Byington, like if you do, like, I don't know, man. If you go to Vandy in year one and you do that, you can coach anywhere, man. You can coach
especially
anywhere.
in the toughest SEC. And real quick, while I guess I'm mentioning the SEC, how do you feel about Auburn taking a tumble last night? You think that's a good thing for them as they make a march toward a national championship? Do you feel like every national championship team kind of needs that loss at the end of the year to help them recalibrate?
Yes and no. I think they're too old to have that.
Okay.
Because I think teams that are not as mature, that can, break them down, build them up, right? But these guys are what, 23, 24 years old? Like, they should know, like, hey, you got to come ready every single game. So I don't think that's going to be as beneficial as it would if they were a bit younger.
Okay.
I just think it's just a loss. It doesn't mean that they're any worse, right? But it's just a loss. And You look back even to last year, like they lost their first round to who? Yale.
Yep.
Right. So like you've got to come ready all the time. And is Bruce Pearl going to give a couple guys a couple more minutes and not play this 10, 11 man rotation like he loves to do? But we'll see.
And I know it's kind of derailed us for a second away from the Indiana stuff.
No, man. It's all good. I like Duke, man. I like that Duke team a lot. I'll say that.
Okay.
Much.
Who do you, of the big name candidates, do you think any of them are realistic at all for Indiana? Because I was talking to Mike DeCourcy a couple of weeks ago, and he had thrown this out at me. No, I don't believe he was incorrect on this. No power program head coach has left for another power program job in quite some time. Do you think that will reign true with this job? Do you think Indiana will more than likely go, end up not getting one of those bigger names, the Scott Drews, that sort of thing?
Didn't Mark Pope just go to Kentucky?
I guess that's true. Because BYU was in the Big 12 last year, were they not? Or I guess so. I guess that's maybe he wasn't including BYU in that discussion, just considering BYU. Where they were at beforehand.
Yeah, I get that, and I've said this before. Like a lot of coaches are not leaving because there's so much uncertainty around them. When coaches are like, I'm telling you, like they are obsessed with control. Obsessed with control. And this is the least amount of control that they've ever had. So what can they control? They can control where they are. They can control where they live. They can control what's going on within their program. They understand the systems where they are at. To leave all that behind and go somewhere fresh and new, they have zero control. They don't know what they're walking into. They don't know what their roster is going to be. There's just so much turmoil going on around them due to the portal and the NIL and all this other garbage that has nothing to do with basketball itself. I feel that's why a lot are not leaving, which I understand and I get. But at the same time, this Indiana job is one of the best jobs out there. One of the best jobs, easily.
And easily the best one that will be open this offseason.
Yes, from an NIL standpoint, a resource standpoint, a branding standpoint. Your fans give a shit. They travel. They love their sports. They are all in on Indiana. And when you have that type of, hey, we need you to make us great, right? It's like, yo, you're part of us. We need you. And if you do this, you'll be a king here. High expectations, but you're not going to make several $1 million for nothing, right? So I think they will be able to get a high quality candidate. And I think if they are going to get someone who is very forward thinking,
okay.
I think they'll be solid.
Last question. I've asked this to pretty much everybody I've talked to about the coaching search, just because he's such an intriguing name, especially if you eliminate the baggage that comes with him. And you know who I'm talking about when I immediately say that, and that's Chris Beard, of course. Yeah, Beard. And Pitino, of course, someone else who has baggage, endorses him a week ago or so. Is there any world where Indiana, I don't want to say overlooks the baggage, but decides to look past it and just say, you know what? You're far enough removed from it. The charges were dropped. Let's get a guy who really wants to be here and loves Indiana. He knows the history, that sort of thing. Do you think that's at all a possibility, or do you think that's completely a shot in the dark right now?
Bloomington's liberal, right?
I would think so. I don't live in Bloomington, but I think so.
Yeah, last time I checked Bloomington, politically, it's all blue. I don't see that happening.
That's fair.
I just don't see it happening. I just don't. I think he'd be great there.
Yeah,
for sure. I think he'd be a great coach there. I just don't see that. It just doesn't. It just, if it does happen, good for Indiana. It wouldn't make sense to me from a It's crazy that
From like
there's
a PC or like a PR perspective.
crazy. Yeah, it's crazy that like it's that I'm going the politics route, but I don't know when you're
There is
more
a lot
like
of politics
liberal
in
leaning.
Indiana basketball, though. Unfortunately, it's just
Yeah.
the way things.
Yeah. I just don't see them. I just can't see it. I just can't see it. And I don't know. The more I'm like into all this stuff and the more that I look into it, it's just like I'm just like you have the stuff that's out there. Charges were dropped, but something happened. This liberal centered university and city, I just don't see it.
Yeah, no, that's very honestly. You wouldn't. You're along. You're thinking it's along the same lines of pretty much everybody else that I've talked to about it. Not necessarily talking about it from a political perspective, but in the same way, it's still too big of a risk almost for Indiana to do something like that. But
Right, because look, if they end up hiring him, then in the first couple of years, an incident happens.
Yeah.
Now it's no longer on Beard, right? It's on the people who hired him.
Yeah.
Right? Now their jobs are going to be in jeopardy because you brought in an at-risk individual that you gave a chance.
And that could tear your entire athletic department apart.
Right. So it's almost like, is it worth my job, my family, and my house to bring this guy in? Or can I bring in someone who could probably have just as much success, but with less concern about non-basketball things? Yeah. Right, exactly. So
and
more protection than anything else.
I appreciate your time as always. Hopefully I didn't keep you for too long, but as always, you give great insight on all things basketball related, and appreciate this conversation.
Anytime, man. It was just 30 minutes, not even.
Hey, so I take most of my guests about 20, but some I go longer with, and I always appreciate those that go longer with me.
All right. No, I have a question for you before we get off.
Of course.
I need a percentage.
Okay.
1 to 100. I'm going to give you a statement, and you have to give me a percentage. You ready?
Give it to me.
Anthony Leal, all defense. What are the chances?
I'm going to say 90%.
Anthony Leal, defensive player of the year.
Maybe 85.
What? You're that high? You're that high?
I've seen your comments on this on social media, and you are part of the reason that I'm higher on it than probably most. But at the same time, I understand why he wouldn't get it, simply because Indiana as a team is not nearly as good as they should be.
Got you. Okay. All right. I like it.
Because I respect. I'm with you on board that he should be respected more. So I guess when I say 85%, I'm saying he deserves it. I don't know that he'll win it, but I think he deserves it in that level.
Absolutely. And you know what? I am so fucking proud of that kid. I'm telling you, I'm so proud of that kid, man. So proud of that kid. Because this defensive stuff, right? He's been doing it. This isn't the first year. He's been doing it in previous years. And
he's always, especially towards the end of the year. I remember last year, he was somebody. I know Indiana didn't make the tournament, but he was somebody that Indiana relied on so heavily, offense and defense, to get the job done. And he's always kind of been the unsung hero for these last several Indiana teams.
Yes, he was in the clutch defensively, just in the clutch defense, just constantly. And I'm like, yo, why do teams keep trying this dude? And then I would watch another game and he'd do the same thing. And then from then on, I was like, okay, I'm a fan. And then this year he gets an opportunity, and the fact that he's doing it with volume now, awesome.
I hope confident in him making all defense and defensive player of the year at all.
I've been trying to push it. I have an agenda. I am going to let everybody know, because a lot of these voters, they don't really pay attention, right? They don't pay attention. I just hope that we could push it, market it hard enough to just get him on ballots enough just to get that all defensive team. I know it's going to be hard because they're someone's gonna put like Ace Baldwin in there when like is you know what I mean. So like they're gonna be putting people on there who are very very trendy.
Yeah.
But hopefully he finds a way. And so hopefully we find him to be a more trendy name that they put on, right? Like,
and a great career at Indiana, of course. He had his own senior day last year along with Trey Galloway, but they both opted to come back for an extra season. And I think both of those players in particular have really made the most of their extra season with Indiana.
Trey's been really good the last few weeks.
And he just surpassed, and again, it's all because of the COVID season, but he surpassed Yogi Ferrell for most appearances in Indiana history, which is interesting.
Well, Trey also missed a bunch of games the first couple years too. So
okay, so he kind of making up for it in a sense.
It makes up for it. He missed probably combined maybe like 15 to 17 games, something like that. But
so shout out to him for making up for it now.
Yeah, definitely, man. Shout out to him. I just want you always want the best for good kids, and I just want Leo because if you get all defense, that's forever.
Yeah.
Right? That is forever. So hopefully that happens. Hopefully that ends up turning out in his favor.
Heck yeah. Well, and again, I appreciate you as always. And we'll check in again down the line. I'll probably try to get in touch with you once Indiana decides who their next head coach is going to be.
Woo! That's going they have to do it pretty fast because
it's going to be weird. It's going to be very weird because they're already talking to people, and once whatever said coach bows out of the NCAA tournament, less than 24 hours later, that's going to end up being named the head coach more than likely.
Yeah, and you want that to happen sooner than later. It's going to suck if a coach ends up in like the Final Four.
Yeah,
and they're not hired until but
at that point, who it is. You know who it is at that point.
Right. You're like, oh, they're not announcing because it's this guy right here. It's this guy.
And it could be, and I know I've now stun locked myself, but imagine if it was somebody like a Bruce Pearl, and then all of a sudden he wins the national championship and he gets cold feet and doesn't want to leave Auburn anymore. You think that's a scenario that plays out?
You get stuck and you're like, oh no. Oh no. Calbert Cheney.
That could be be something. And we'll wrap this thing up. Thank you again as always.
All right. See you, man.
A big thanks as always to Ant Wright for all of his insight and great conversation. Hopefully you enjoyed that. And we'll definitely reach out to him once again after Indiana decides who they're going to move forward with when it comes to their future head coach. Speaking of that, I want to share a piece of sound with you real quick. Again, this is something that maybe some of you have already heard before, but I just heard this for the first time earlier this morning. But Robbie Hummel, of course, Purdue guy, commentator extraordinaire. He may be Indiana fans' favorite Purdue player just because he's mastered the art of objectivity, however you want to pronounce it. Because that guy could commentate anybody, even of course his fiercest rival, and just be so great at it. You cannot tell, that he was a former Purdue alum and, be angry about the result. Now, maybe he will be on the inside, but he disguises that in so many ways. So Robbie Hummel does one of the best jobs when it comes to really in general, just being a good commentator. He's one of the best out there right now. I feel like he went on the field of 68 the other day and shared with Jeff Goodman who he thinks Indiana's next head coach can be. And here's what he shared.
I like McDermott, and maybe that's biased because I've seen so much of Creighton, but I love their offense, and it's modern. They shoot a ton of threes. He's won with, not that Creighton has bad resources, but less resources than what Indiana has. He's a really good coach. I would
he could handle. I actually think
and I think his demeanor is perfect for that. He would. I
agree. He's not going.
I'll just stop it right there. But yeah, Greg McDermott, somebody that I feel like a lot of people, maybe I'm just totally out of touch with this. No pun intended, but I feel like most people haven't really spoken a lot about Greg McDermott as being somebody who may end up being a serious candidate for the Indiana job. And I think I agree with him. I haven't thought a whole lot about him, but he's had Creighton in positions that before he really got them rolling, they hadn't really been in before. And I know Creighton's not a bad program, but when I think of Creighton basketball, it's interesting. When you look at the state of Nebraska, you have Nebraska football, of course, the Cornhuskers, but most of them, I don't want to say most, but it's kind of like the Indiana basketball, Notre Dame football thing. In Nebraska, you've got Nebraska, you have Nebraska. I can't speak. In Nebraska, you have Cornhusker football and Creighton basketball that typically, if you're doing the double fandom thing, that's what it looks like. And so they care about basketball there. But, of course, at Indiana, it's a whole different level. And if he ends up being somebody that emerges as a top candidate or even the guy, I don't think I'd be disappointed in that. So definitely another name to keep an eye on. And again, maybe it's just the Robbie Hummel effect. We hear something he says and we're like, he knows what he's talking about. He's not biased. Maybe we should listen to what he says. So we'll and he'd be somebody I'd love to talk to on the show eventually. Because of he's such a likable dude. How my friend Dustin Schutte, Purdue fan, also very likable Purdue guy. Two of my favorite Purdue guys. One of them I know more personally. Well, one of them I know personally, the other one I don't at all. So I'll talk to anybody who's willing to be objective and not just speak from emotion on certain things. So shout out to Robbie Hummel, I guess. I know he wasn't speaking to my interest, but it piqued my interest. That's for sure. And also, while we're talking coaches, and before I move on to some bracketology, bracket forecasting type stuff, one thing about Ben McCollum that I've recently learned about, and maybe I should have been more aware of this from the get-go, and it doesn't mean I'm opposed to him being Indiana's next head coach if he ends up emerging. And Tyler Smith sort of mentioned this the other day, if I'm not mistaken, whenever we had him on. But him having the slowest pace, one of the slowest paces, I think it might be the second slowest in the country. I mean, we've seen how that worked out before with the regime before Mike Woodson. And I don't necessarily care if you win. And if that formula wins the way in which he knows how to do it, then by all means, let's give it a whirl here in Bloomington once again. But I think the risk there becomes a lot greater just because we've seen that style of play fail at Indiana before, but with a much different type of head coach, at least when it comes to their demeanor, right? So maybe it would work in Indiana. I still am not anti Ben McCollum. He's still up there, probably my top 3 to 4, 5-ish candidates, maybe. Especially if you don't get one of the big guns, but it's definitely worth thinking about. And some of you are probably like, "Well, John, I knew that already. Why are you telling me this now?" Well, sometimes we're not all as bright as we're not all the sharpest tool in the shed, right? Especially me. I'm not anywhere nearly close to being the sharpest tool in the shed. Excuse me. But let's go ahead and move on to, I want to look at Mike DeCourcy and Joe Lunardi's bracket forecast and bracketology in that order. And of course, just as a reminder, these were released before Indiana's most recent result against Oregon. But let's look at Mike DeCourcy's first. He currently has Indiana slated as an 11 seed in the South region, playing Mississippi State of the SEC. And his brackets sometimes kind of look funky, so it takes me a minute to see who he would be matched up with. But it looks like in this particular region, they would face the winner of Jacksonville State and Wisconsin, which that's pretty odd to be right next to a Big Ten team. Usually you don't have intra-conference matchups until at least the second weekend. At least they try to do that. I know they can't always do that depending on the number of teams from your conference that get into the tournament and that sort of thing. But I don't know if that would be how it would work out. Of course, I trust Mike DeCourcy's placement of teams more than I would trust my own. But it is very odd to see Indiana potentially facing off with Wisconsin in the round of 32. But I would assume, and of course, with this particular 11, this particular 11 seed, I can't remember if it's the 11 or the 12 that is in the first 4 like in Dayton. It might be 2 of each, but Indiana does not fall into this category in Mike DeCourcy's bracket. So I would assume with the Oregon loss, they may fall down to that last 4 in conversation. So according to this and to, looking ahead and making some future projections based on that, Indiana would still be in. But with that being said, you wouldn't want to lose to Ohio State because that could knock you out and force you to have to go on a big run in the NCAA tournament. And that's why I've been saying all along that the ideal situation to be comfortable, for Indiana to be comfortable in the NCAA tournament, is to win these last couple of games and not even have to worry about what ifs with the Big Ten tournament, because we've been in this as fans, I should say. We've had to root for a good Big Ten tournament run for the last several years, it feels like. And I will say this, it does make the Big Ten tournament, at least, from the jitters perspective, if you're watching it and you're wanting to see a good performance, it does add to that. It does make the Big Ten tournament seem more meaningful, because we've seen good seasons, right, where you look at it and you're already in, you've already won the Big Ten or whatever it may be, and you're thinking, like, why does Indiana have to play in this? They've already proven that they're, one of the best teams in the country. This can only hurt their seeding. And of course, that's looking at it from a we're not going to go win this thing type of perspective. And of course, they never have. So, and really, I feel like Indiana's played better in the Big Ten tournament with their backs against the wall. So, very interesting thing to think about when it comes to, the bubble conversation, I guess. But yeah, that's from Mike DeCourcy. He's got the Hoosiers. And if you'll excuse me, I'm going to take another cough break for a second. I'd love to live in a world where I don't have to cough so often. I feel like this has happened all winter long, at least since before January, or maybe right at the beginning of January and beyond, in different spats here and there. But I can't wait to be through this, throat nonsense. But as always, happy to have my coffee with me to help supplement that. But let's look at where Joe Lunardi's got Indiana. Again, I'll say it once again, actually, I want to double check because he updates his more frequently sometimes. Okay, I was going to say this might be post-Oregon loss, but it is not. This is pre-Oregon loss. He has Indiana as in the last 4 buys, which I believe would kind of be similar to where Mike DeCourcy had Indiana. He has them as an 11 seed in the South region, which would pair them with St. Mary's, and facing off with the winner of, you can kind of guess, this is where we always kind of assume Indiana is going to land, facing the winner of Kentucky and Utah Valley. They love to put Indiana and Kentucky in there, and I love it too, to be quite honest. It's been a while since Indiana and Kentucky have played, and of course their series is going to renew next season at Rupp Arena. Looking forward to that. But Indiana, the most recent time they faced each other was that last 2016 season that we talked about earlier. Whenever Indiana made the Sweet 16, they won the Big Ten championship with Yogi Ferrell, Thomas Bryant, that crew, Troy Williams, a lot of good guys, OG Anunoby. It's been that's the last team to face Kentucky, and they defeated them, thankfully. So it would be nice to get a little precursor to what's to come in the next few years. Of course, it won't be Mike Woodson versus Mark Pope anymore, but it'd be nice. Again, another thing for Mike Woodson to go out on that would be really nice for him, and just things to remember him by. It'd be great if one of his last wins was, your border rival in the Wildcats. And it's aggravating too that Kentucky fans don't like to see Indiana as a rival. And, that's fine. If you don't see Indiana as a rival, then so be it. But it's also fun to see them aggravated when they lose, because they see Indiana as a bad loss. Like, oh my God, how did we lose to Indiana? Oh my gosh, we lost to Indiana. And it's all really, at least from my perspective and what I've grown up seeing, it's all because they think all we think about is the Watt shot. And, there was a time where, yeah, Indiana fans really blew that out of proportion, me being one of them. But that's what they'll do. If Indiana were to face Kentucky in the NCAA tournament, what they'll do is they'll just try to make fun of us for the Watt shot again, which will, and maybe I'm off base with that, but I kind of feel like that's the direction that their fans would take it and call us an irrelevant program and that sort of thing. But who knows? Maybe it won't even happen, but it is worth throwing that out there. So again, very similar to Mike DeCourcy's, I'm sure with that loss, it would bump Indiana down to that last 4 in line, which if we're looking at that, currently Ohio State is in that last 4 in area as well. So that very well, like we've been saying, Indiana versus Ohio State this Saturday, a lot on the line. Could be an elimination-ish type of game, meaning that if you lose and then lose in your first round of the Big Ten tournament, you're probably out. Indiana's got to, if they want to feel more secure going into Indianapolis the next week, beat Ohio State. And you may not have to sweat as much. I do think you'd still, to ultimately feel comfortable, you'd like to win one more game. You don't just want to be one and done in the Big Ten tournament, but that's kind of what you need to be thinking right now if you want to be sitting pretty when Selection Sunday almost said rears its ugly head, but no, Selection Sunday is one of the coolest days of the year for college basketball. So not a very ugly head, a very appealing head, if that's even what we want to refer to it as. All right, only going to go a few more minutes here, and so we'll do. I was going to get into a couple of quick hitters. Actually, we'll do some quick mentions, and then I'll get into our final. I'll pose this question to you, and maybe we can discuss it further on Friday or something like that. So I'm going to tease you just a little bit longer. I'm going to do some quick hitters, and then I'm going to mention what I had kind of promised, if you will, back towards the beginning of the show. But some really quick things. Jalen Hood-Schifino signed a 2-way deal with the 76ers. Good for him. Glad to see that he's still kind of getting a chance to, I don't want to say make a name for himself, but maybe find his footing in the NBA, because he had a lot of promise early on and things kind of just fell by the wayside. And I don't like seeing guys bow out early, because it feels like recently a lot of Indiana players who have gotten drafted, they don't pan out the way that, say some of the Tom Crean guys have now, except Trace Jackson Davis. One of the biggest surprises, if you will. So maybe what I said isn't necessarily true, but I'm thinking guys like Romeo Langford, who didn't really have the best of careers, that sort of thing. So yeah, good for him, and wishing him the best of luck at his new team in Philadelphia. And then when it comes to football guys, CJ West, former lineman for Indiana, I should say, had a really good showing in Indianapolis. He became, he had a 4.95 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine. He's just the 9th defensive tackle since 2003 to run sub 5 seconds while weighing more than 315 pounds. So good for him. Wish him the best of luck. Hopefully he gets drafted. I'm sure he will fall somewhere. And he mentioned that he's going to outwork everybody. So I am confident that he will find himself on some sort of NFL roster come next fall. So looking forward to seeing where he ends up. And then Indiana football had their pro day. And again, those are it's really a good day for guys who didn't get invited to the NFL Combine to kind of show off their skills. And apparently, this is according to Hoosier Huddle, by the way. I want to give them credit. Jacob Mangum-Farrar apparently had 31 reps on the bench press, which tied him for third best who actually went to the Combine. So maybe a guy like him will find himself sneaking up in some of the later rounds, if you will, in the NFL draft. So best of luck to all the Indiana football players who will be hoping that their name gets called. I know Miles Price is another one. Curtis Rourke, of course. There could be a number of guys. Keshawn Williams, who will be waiting to hear their name called next month. And I don't want to say it's going to be a record-breaking year for draft picks. I mean, Indiana did a lot of what they did this year without a ton of, dare I say, not a lot of NFL caliber talent. Now, yeah, a lot of guys have, really played their way onto the NFL boards, like Curtis Rourke. But on paper, how many NFL guys did Indiana have before the beginning of last season? Maybe you can name a couple. I mean, I don't know who I would have named, if I'm being honest. We all knew there was potential, but who really was a true NFL prospect going into last fall. Couldn't really tell you one. Maybe Omar Cooper, maybe Donovan McCulley. And I know McCulley ended up not really panning out this past year, but he was somebody that, had a lot of upside going into the fall. So anyway, those are my quick hitters. And I want to wrap up by posing the question that I thought I was going to have more time for. But here's something that we can maybe discuss a little further on Friday. And again, I don't remember which social media account put this out there, so I don't just want to throw a random name out there, but I didn't come up with this question. I'll go ahead and just say that this isn't my idea, but someone posed the question, would Indiana, instead of moving on with a brand new head coach, is there a scenario where Indiana would keep Mike Woodson if he made it all the way to the Final Four? Now, they had mentioned second weekend. I don't think that would happen at all. But Final Four, is there a scenario where Indiana would keep Mike Woodson if they made it all the way to, I believe, San Antonio? So I'm going to try to put that in the back of my mind, and I'm going to let it stew some more. I'm not going to share my thoughts on that right now, but I'm curious. Maybe you think that's a completely silly, idiotic question, and you can tell me that in the comments if you want to. But if you have some thoughts on that as well, I'd love to hear those. Feel free to do that. I'll try to leave some time on Friday for other YouTube comments as well. So looking forward to that. And, it could be a very interesting discussion. Maybe it won't be, but I thought it was, I don't know if it's really worth humoring a ton, because it's probably, first of all, Indiana making the Final Four, that's probably not going to happen. There's a lot more likely chance that they miss the tournament than they make a run to the Final Four. But as we've mentioned several times, crazier things have happened. NC State, the example that I keep bringing up, as recent as last season, nearly fired their coach and then went to the Final Four. But again, they had a pretty shitty season right after that. They may be worse this year than last year, pre-tournament, I should say. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's show. I appreciate you guys sticking around as always. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll be back on Friday for a pre-weekend edition, the final pre-regular season game edition as they get ready for Ohio State. And then next week, it's Big Ten tournament time. So until Friday, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.